one result of the prosperity of the 1950s is that it leads to a much higher rate of home ownership. The GI Bill also is related to this, as several million veterans are getting beneficial home loans. And so we're seeing more and more Americans purchasing their homes, and also more and more Americans buying automobiles, which I'll mention shortly. But one of the results of this is a growth in the suburbs. More and more Americans buying homes that are some distance away from the metropolitan centers where they work. The most notable of them you see pictured on your screen here. It's a suburb called Levittown on Long Island, New York. The developer was named William J. Levitt, who might be thought of as kind of the Henry Ford of the home building industry. Levittown ultimately comes to include more than 17,000 homes. It's just an enormous neighborhood, and you see the picture there. It just kind of sprawls almost to the horizon. But what Levitt introduces into the home industry is mass production of homes. In much the same way that Henry Ford introduced mass production in the automobile industry. What William Levitt does is he has only a very few designs that each home can be built. And in fact, if you look in the picture, if you look very closely, the homes are virtually identical to each other. And that's because William J. Levitt would have mass-produced, you know, the exact same kind of windows, the exact same chimney, the exact same walls, doors, design, and everything. And then he could just ship all of that out to the building site, and they could build homes very, very rapidly. For the most part, these are sort of modestly priced middle-class housing. Again, many of the people who are able to afford these homes are military veterans. Others of them are working in the growing number of white-collar industries in the big cities. Now, related to this is the resurgence in the automobile industry and the reliance on the automobile. You can't really have suburbs without the automobile. Otherwise, all of the people living in these suburbs are going to be relying on mass transportation. And while many people do take the train, for instance, into work, many, many more own their own cars. And the automobile really does enjoy a resurgence in the 1950s. One factor is the returned prosperity of the 1950s. But the other thing is that we've got to consider, if we think about the couple of decades prior to the 1950s, in the 1930s, you had the Great Depression, so many people couldn't afford to buy new cars. And then in the 1940s, you had World War II, when the automobile industry was largely shut down, so the car makers could build things for the military. And so it's not until the 1950s that people have the means, the desire, and a supply of new automobiles. Many people were still driving cars from the 1920s. They were driving their old Model A or Model T. So the automobile enjoys a resurgence. And with it, we also see an increased interest in road building and getting around in this country. And one of the great legacies of Eisenhower's presidency is the interstate highway system, passed in 1956 with the Interstate Highway Act. Now, bear in mind, this is in the immediate aftermath of the Korean War, and that was one of the things that sparked Eisenhower's interest in the highways, because during the Korean War, we found it was very slow and cumbersome to try to get military supplies and transportation and products across the country. Because imagine, without interstates, how do you get things around? And so Eisenhower implemented this act to build a network of interstate highways, much like we know today, that would connect the country vertically and horizontally, or north and south and east and west. So the initial thought is a military one, but it comes to simply transform our lives. Think about your own lives. How often have you driven on the interstates? How do you get anywhere that you're going? If you're taking a trip of any length at all, invariably you're going to wind up on the interstates. And then we think about all the roadside industries that accompany this. At each stop along the way on the interstate, what do you see? Fast food, gas stations, hotels, motels, national parks, tourist attractions, and all these sorts of things. So tourism becoming a major industry in the 1950s. And this Interstate Highway Act resembles the New Deal programs under FDR. It is a massive federal works program that employs tens of thousands of people for decades as we are building this network of